Hello again. My name is Nicole Sharp, and I am an advocate for domestic violence awareness. And I have been sharing my book, reading some excerpts from my book, The End of November Growing Up with Domestic Violence, which can be found on Amazon, which details my memories growing up with domestic violence. So, the last chapter that I read, entitled November 22nd, was extremely difficult for me to read because in that chapter, I read about the details leading up to my mother's murder. So my father murdered my mother after many years of domestic violence, and I just needed some time to myself. I named the book The End of November for a reason. The end of November was when my mother was killed, November 22nd. But not only that, November always marked a time of festivities and happiness and a joyousness, at the end of the year. That was the beginning of that. And so when my mother was taken from me and my siblings, we didn't have that joyousness any longer. So it was like an end to all the happiness that we had as a family. Not only was it the time my mother was murdered, November 22nd, but also it was a couple of days before Thanksgiving, which was always fun in our home. And then right after that was my birthday, and then my mother's birthday a couple of days later. And so that was always a fun time, and then Christmas. But all of that ended at that time. So I just needed a couple of weeks to just, reflect and to just stay away from the book because it is a heavy book. It's my life, and it's a heavy book. And I wrote it with the intention of helping people to understand what it's like for children to witness domestic violence and the effects therein and the aftermath. And that's exactly the name of the second part of the book. Part two is called The Aftermath. And I'll just get into chapter 15, which is entitled Water is Thicker Than Blood Sometimes. I'm going to make you guys rich. This is exactly how one of my aunts, Aunt Celeste, greeted us when we finally left Police Precinct 69 and arrived at my grandmother's house. It was almost 4 a.m. The constant barrage of questions from detectives was, as they explained, so that they could get all the details of the horrific night as they were fresh in our minds. Although the interrogation was for our benefit, it felt like torture. These are details you want to forget. And here I was being forced to remember. It felt as if someone pinned my eyelids back so they could throw as much salt in them as possible. One haunting feature I will never forget about sitting there in the precinct was this: watching my 3-year-old brother playing with a Bart Simpson figurine on a skateboard. It was a little fringe benefit from the McDonald's Happy Meal a detective kindly bought for us. Bart Simpson kept him occupied as he drove it back and forth, back and forth. But I knew his little ears were perked, listening to the questions being thrown at my sister and I. My sister couldn't stop crying. The little 8-year-old looked as if she aged 30 years. Pain was scarred all over her face. I tried not to cry because I realized my siblings fed off of me as the older one, but I couldn't stop. My eyes were virtual dams drowning in tears. My head felt like it was in the middle of a nutcracker, and two large men were on either side pushing against it with all their might. I just wanted to scream and never, never stop screaming. Years of frustration from infancy culminated in one fateful night when my father finally came through with his 2-decade-old threat to kill my mother. Child welfare services waited in the precinct for me and my siblings to take us to our respective orphanages. They were going to split us up because of the large age ranges. My favorite uncle, Uncle Timothy, stepped up and begged for us to be allowed to go to our grandmother's house, at least for that weekend. Luckily, his request was granted, but of course, ACS, Administration of Child Services agents, would later have to come to inspect the home to see if we would be allowed to stay there permanently. Upon leaving the police station, the throbbing in my head just got worse. I knew there would be a crowd at my grandmother's house, which was the central meeting place for the family. On a night like this, my siblings and I needed all the support and all the hugs we can get. As I suspected, there was a crowd of silent faces, silent, sad faces everywhere. But when Aunt Celeste, my mother's youngest sister, in her late 20s at the time, ran up to me and said, "I'm going to make you guys rich," I was taken aback. Rich. Even if that were so, is that something that children who just witnessed their father murder their mother and who barely got out of the house alive want to hear? Obviously, my aunt thought that money brought some sort of great godlike comfort to the bereaved. Even though I knew Aunt Celeste had a thirst for everything expensive, from clothes to shoes to cars, etc., I never thought that she would be so cold. My mom was always her bridge over troubled water. Whenever she had disagreements with the other brothers and sisters, and there were many, she would always run to my mother for some solace and a shoulder to cry on. My mother was always there for her through many failed business ideas, from t-shirt designing to her food delivery service. My mother always bought her goods and encouraged her. Who knows, maybe she even helped to fund these fast money-making schemes. Whatever the case, my mom was a rock for her, just as she was to her other siblings, including a couple who were in the island of Barbados. Little did I know that my aunt's greed was a sign of things to come. It was just a doorway into a new chapter in my little life, a chapter where greed dictated everything, including the way my family treated my brother, sister, and I. This chapter of my life is very difficult to write about because it hurts to know that the overwhelming majority of my family, people who were supposed to love us children unconditionally, people who I loved, really saw us as a perfect opportunity to make some extra cash. And why not? We didn't have any parents to protect us. We endured many unfair situations with family members, too many to list, so I will only mention a few instances. Funds were kept from us, such as Social Security, etc. Later, I found out that my grandmother allowed Aunt Celeste to claim all three of us on her tax return every single year, when we never saw a cent. She continued to file for my sister and I, even when I started working and filing my own tax return. Unbelievably, she continued even after I got married, until one day the IRS caught up to her and she ended up paying back everything. My grandmother would exercise her demons on my siblings and I. She made it clear to us on a regular basis how much of a burden we were, and the only reason she was keeping us was because our mother was her daughter. She and I ended up arguing on many occasions. The routine was always the same. When she had a gripe with me, she would complain to as many people as she could, all of her 7 remaining children, my father's family, friends of the family, etc. If I didn't make up my bed one day, everyone would know. But then I noticed that her complaints were being blown out of proportion, even to the point where she would outright lie about me. Once, when I confronted her about missing funds for my siblings and I, she adamantly refused to give me any information. I told her that if she didn't give me any information, I would be forced to hire a lawyer to investigate. She then told everyone that I threatened to call the cops on her and have her arrested. It was so far-fetched that I started to get the calls back to back from aunts and uncles screaming at me, calling me ungrateful, etc. I was filled with fright. I realized that I could be accused of horrible things and no one would be in my corner to defend me. Not my mother, not my father, no one. And yeah, that's how it was. This is just another facet that I just want people to know. Orphans, we don't have anybody to defend us. It's a blessing if an orphan ends up in the home of someone who actually loves them. But unfortunately, most of the time, it's with people who view them like they viewed me like a cash cow. But you wouldn't think that your own blood relatives would treat you in such a way. But I learned a very hard lesson. That's why I named this chapter Water is Thicker Than Blood sometimes. Because fortunately, God did send me people who were not related to me, who became better, who just treated me way better than my own family. And that made a difference in my development as a child, an adolescent, and a young adult. So I'm just going to leave this here for now. And next time we will be reading chapter 16. It's entitled A Shell. I want to thank you for taking the time out to listen. I know it's difficult, but I thank you so much. Take care. See you next time. And please remember to like and share to others who may benefit from this. And please subscribe as well. Thank you.